The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Catherine stood by the window, her fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass. She had been awake since dawn, unable to shake the feeling that something profound was about to change in their lives. The royal schedule lay forgotten on her desk, filled with engagements that suddenly seemed trivial compared to the weight pressing on her chest. William found her there an hour later, still in her nightgown, watching the world wake up beyond the palace walls. He approached quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Without words, he placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling the tension that had become her constant companion over the past few weeks. "The doctors called again," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine's reflection in the window showed no surprise, only a quiet acceptance that made his heart ache. They had been expecting this call, dreading it, yet somehow knowing it would come. She turned in his arms, and for a moment, they were not the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, not the future king and queen. They were simply William and Catherine, two people facing an impossible situation together. The weight of the crown, the expectations of millions, the carefully orchestrated public life they led, none of it mattered in this moment. The palace staff moved quietly through the halls, sensing the change in atmosphere without understanding its source. Mrs. Henderson, Catherine's longtime dresser, noticed how the Duchess's usual morning routine had been abandoned. The breakfast tray sat untouched outside their private quarters, growing cold as the hours passed. In the nursery down the hall, their children played with their nanny, unaware of the storm gathering around their family. Their laughter echoed through the corridors, a bittersweet soundtrack to William and Catherine's private moment of reckoning. The innocence in those sounds made Catherine's eyes fill with tears she had been holding back for days. William pulled her closer, remembering their wedding day, when the whole world had watched them promise to stand by each other through whatever came. The vows they had spoken in Westminster Abbey seemed so simple then, surrounded by pageantry and celebration. Now, facing the reality of those promises, the words carried a weight neither of them had fully understood at 29. The phone in William's study rang insistently, but he made no move to answer it. Private secretaries could handle the calls, the meetings, the endless demands of royal duty. This morning belonged to them, to the conversation they needed to have, to the decisions that would change everything. Catherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She thought about the girl she had been at university, the one who had fallen in love with a boy who happened to be a prince. That girl could never have imagined this moment, this choice, this test of everything she thought she knew about love and sacrifice. "Whatever happens," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "we face it together. The world can wait." Outside, photographers with long lenses positioned themselves hopefully near the palace gates, unaware that the biggest story of their careers was unfolding behind closed doors. The morning news program speculated about the royal couple's sudden cancellation of public engagements, but their guesses fell far short of the truth. As the sun climbed higher, casting new patterns of light and shadow across their bedroom, William and Catherine held each other in silence, both understanding that this embrace might be the last normal moment they would share for a very long time. The world would soon demand answers, explanations, public statements. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of their private quarters, they had only each other and the love that had carried them through 10 years of marriage. The weight of what was coming pressed down on them both, but in that embrace, they found strength. Whatever the world would watch them endure, whatever emotions would be laid bare for millions to see, it would begin with this moment of absolute privacy, absolute trust, absolute love. The call from Dr. Morrison came at precisely 10:30, interrupting the quiet sanctuary William and Catherine had created. William answered on the third ring, his hand finding Catherine's automatically as the specialist's voice filled the room through the speaker. The words they heard were clinical, measured, professional, but their meaning hit like a physical blow. "The results are conclusive," Dr. Morrison said, his usually warm tone carefully neutral. "We need to discuss treatment options immediately. I've cleared my afternoon schedule." Catherine closed her eyes, letting the reality wash over her. The headaches that had plagued her for months, the dizzy spells she had attributed to exhaustion, the moments of confusion that she had blamed on royal duties. They all made sense now. The tumor was small, Dr. Morrison explained, but located in a critical area. Surgery was possible, but the risks were significant. William's grip on her hand tightened as the doctor outlined the treatment plan. Chemotherapy, radiation, months of uncertainty stretching ahead. The words seemed to bounce off the walls of their bedroom, creating an echo that neither of them wanted to hear. When the call ended, the silence that followed was deafening. "We have to tell the children," Catherine said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. The thought of explaining this to George, Charlotte, and Louis made her stomach clench. How do you tell a child that their mother is sick? How do you maintain hope while being honest about fear? William stood and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining control. Below, the palace gardeners were tending to the autumn flowers, their movements peaceful and routine. He envied them their simple concerns, their ordinary worries about weather and soil and seasonal changes. "The palace will want a statement," he said, still looking out at the grounds. "They'll want to control the narrative, manage the public response." His voice carried a bitterness that surprised them both. After years of accepting royal protocol, the thought of packaging his wife's illness into a press release felt obscene. Catherine joined him at the window, watching a young gardener carefully deadhead the roses. "Let them wait," she said quietly. "This is ours first. Our family, our decision about how to handle it." The morning stretched into afternoon as they made the hardest phone calls of their lives. Catherine's mother, Carol, broke down completely, her composed exterior crumbling when she heard the news. Her father, Michael, was quieter but no less devastated. William's calls to his father and stepmother were formal, strained, years of royal training making it impossible to express raw emotion, even in crisis. By 3 o'clock, a small circle of family and closest friends knew the truth. Each conversation had been difficult, but none more so than the one with Harry calling from California. The distance between the brothers, created by years of misunderstanding and hurt, seemed to collapse in an instant when William's voice broke delivering the news. "I'm coming home," Harry said immediately, and for the first time in hours, William felt something like relief. The palace staff moved with unusual quiet efficiency, sensing something momentous without being told what it was. Meals appeared and disappeared, mostly untouched. Phone calls were redirected. The usual bustle of royal life continued around them, but William and Catherine existed in a bubble of suspended time. Late in the afternoon, they finally ventured to the nursery to speak with their children. George, now old enough to understand some of the gravity, listened with the serious expression that reminded Catherine so much of William at that age. Charlotte asked practical questions about hospitals and doctors with her characteristic directness. Louis, still very young, was more interested in whether Mummy would still be able to read bedtime stories. "Mummy is going to need some special medicine," William explained carefully, "and she might be tired sometimes. But we're all going to take very good care of her." The children accepted this explanation with the resilience of youth, already moving on to discuss their plans for the weekend and whether they could visit the horses. Their easy acceptance was both heartbreaking and reassuring, a reminder that life would continue, that there were still normal moments to be treasured. As evening approached, Catherine found herself thinking about the hundreds of people who faced similar diagnoses every day, without the benefit of world-class medical care or public sympathy. The thought humbled her and strengthened her resolve. Whatever came next, she would face it with dignity, not just for her family but for all those who would watch her journey. That night, as they prepared for bed, William helped Catherine with her evening routine with extra gentleness, as if she might break under his touch. She caught his hand as he brushed her hair, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I'm still me," she said firmly. "I'm still here." He nodded, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that sat like a stone in her own chest. Tomorrow would bring doctors and treatments and public scrutiny. Tonight they had each other, and the promise they had made to face whatever came together. The decision to go public came 3 days later, after countless consultations with doctors, palace officials, and communications experts. Catherine insisted on recording the announcement herself, despite the visible toll the stress was taking. She sat in the garden at Adelaide Cottage, the autumn light soft on her face, and spoke directly to the camera with characteristic grace. "I wanted you to hear this from me personally," she began, her voice clear and steady. The words that followed were carefully chosen but genuine. explaining her diagnosis without dwelling on the frightening details. She spoke of her gratitude for the medical team, her determination to fight, and her hope that sharing her story might help others facing similar battles. William stood just out of frame, watching his wife transform a private nightmare into a public message of hope. The strength she displayed in that moment took his breath away. This was the woman he had fallen in love with at university. Intelligent, compassionate, unbreakably strong when it mattered most. The video was released at 6 p.m, sending shockwaves around the world. Within minutes, social media exploded with messages of support. News anchors interrupted regular programming to report the story. The palace phone lines jammed as journalists clamored for additional information and interviews. The response was overwhelming in its intensity and generosity. Flowers began arriving at all the royal residences within hours, not just from heads of state and celebrities, but from ordinary people who had been touched by Catherine's courage. A 7-year-old girl from Liverpool sent a hand-drawn picture of Catherine with the words, "Get better, Princess," written in crayon. An elderly man from Scotland sent a pressed flower from his garden with a note saying it had brought his late wife comfort during her illness. But with the outpouring of support came the inevitable intrusion. Photographers camped outside the hospital where Catherine would receive treatment. Tabloid newspapers speculated about her prognosis with ghoulish enthusiasm. Social media trolls criticized everything from her appearance in the announcement video to her decision to go public at all. William struggled with his anger at the media circus surrounding his wife's illness. Years of dealing with press attention had not prepared him for this level of scrutiny, of something so personal and painful. He found himself longing for the privacy his mother had never been afforded, the simple dignity of facing illness without the world watching every moment. Dr. Morrison's clinic became a fortress of security and privacy. Special protocols were established for Catherine's visits, with decoy vehicles and carefully planned routes to minimize public attention. Still, each trip to the hospital felt like running a gauntlet of cameras and shouted questions. The first chemotherapy session was scheduled for the following Monday. Catherine spent the weekend at Anmer Hall with the children, trying to create normal memories before the treatment began. They walked on the beach, built sandcastles, and played the simple games that had always brought them joy. The photographs taken by their personal photographer that weekend were some of the most poignant ever captured of the royal family. A mother treasuring time with her children, knowing that the weeks ahead would be difficult. On Sunday evening, as they prepared to return to London, Catherine sat on the porch watching Louis chase butterflies in the garden. The late summer evening was perfect, warm and golden, and she tried to memorize every detail, the sound of her son's laughter, the smell of the roses climbing the cottage walls, the feeling of William's hand in hers. "Do you remember our first weekend here?" William asked, following her gaze across the garden. They had fallen in love with Anmer Hall immediately, seeing it as a place where their children could have something approaching a normal childhood. "You burned the steaks on the barbecue." Catherine laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in days. "And we ate ice cream for dinner instead." "The children thought it was the best meal ever," William replied. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their youngest child's innocent joy, both thinking how precious these ordinary moments had become. That night, as they tucked the children into bed, each bedtime ritual felt weighted with extra significance. Charlotte's questions about why Mummy looked sad, George's protective hovering, Louis's innocent demand for one more story. All of it felt like pieces of their old life that they were carefully storing away. Harry arrived from California late that evening, slipping into the house quietly to avoid the media attention his presence would generate. The reunion between the brothers was emotional, years of distance collapsing in a single embrace. For the first time since the diagnosis, William broke down completely, his composure finally cracking under the weight of his fear. "I can't lose her," he whispered against his brother's shoulder, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I don't know how to do this without her." Harry held him tight, both of them remembering another time, another tragedy that had shaped their lives forever. But this time, Harry promised, they would face it together. This time, the family would not be divided by grief and circumstance. As the house settled into quiet around them, Catherine lay awake, listening to the sound of William's breathing beside her. Tomorrow would bring the first treatment, the beginning of a journey none of them could fully prepare for. But tonight, Surrounded by the people who loved her most, she felt ready to fight. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and hope. Catherine walked slowly beside William, her hand resting lightly on his arm more for his comfort than her own. The oncology ward was a world away from the glittering staterooms and formal ceremonies that usually filled their days. Here, everyone wore the same expression of quiet determination mixed with fear. Dr. Morrison greeted them personally, his warm smile genuine despite the clinical setting. "The treatment room is ready," he said, leading them down a hallway lined with inspirational posters and children's artwork. Catherine found herself studying a drawing of a rainbow with the words "Hope Lives Here" written beneath it in a child's careful handwriting. The chemotherapy suite was surprisingly pleasant. Large windows overlooked a small garden where patients could sit between treatments. Catherine was shown to a comfortable reclining chair with a small table beside it, holding water, crackers, and magazines she would never read. The IV stand waited nearby like a silent sentinel. William pulled up a chair beside her, his presence both comforting and heartbreaking. She could see him trying to memorize every detail, as if his attention alone could somehow shield her from what was coming. When the nurse began preparing the IV, his hand found hers automatically. The first drugs were anti-nausea medications, explained with practiced efficiency by the nurse who had clearly guided hundreds of patients through this process. Then came the chemotherapy itself, clear liquid that looked deceptively harmless as it flowed through the tube toward Catherine's arm. She watched it with fascination rather than fear, this medicine that would battle the enemy growing in her brain. Time moved differently in the treatment room. William read to her from a book of poetry they had discovered on their honeymoon, his voice a steady anchor in the strange suspension of normal life. Other patients came and went, some chatting cheerfully with visitors, others sleeping peacefully in their chairs. The quiet solidarity of the ward was unexpected and oddly comforting. Halfway through the treatment, Catherine felt the first wave of nausea. The nurse appeared instantly with medications and reassurance, adjusting her position and offering ice chips. William's face went pale as he watched his wife struggle with her first taste of what the coming months would bring. "It's working," Catherine whispered, squeezing his hand. "Every minute it's fighting back." The treatment took 4 hours. When it was finally finished, Catherine felt drained but strangely triumphant. She had faced the first battle and survived. The war was far from over, but this victory, small as it was, felt significant. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing the reality of what their lives had become. The palace had arranged for complete privacy during their return, giving them space to decompress without cameras or questions. Catherine leaned against the car window, watching London pass by, thinking about the thousands of people who made this same journey every day without security escorts or private medical suites. That evening, the children were unusually gentle with their mother, sensing something different even if they couldn't name it. Charlotte presented her with a card she had made at school, decorated with hearts and flowers and the words, "My mummy is brave." George offered to help with anything she needed, his 9-year-old face serious with new responsibility. Louis simply climbed into her lap and stayed there, his warm weight a perfect comfort. The second treatment, 2 weeks later, was harder. Catherine's body was learning what to expect, and the anticipatory anxiety made everything more difficult. The nausea hit earlier and lasted longer. William canceled all his engagements to be with her, despite her protests that he should maintain his normal schedule. "The country needs you to keep working," she argued weakly from her treatment chair. "The country has survived before when royals faced personal crises," he replied firmly. "Right now my only job is being your husband." The media coverage of Catherine's treatment was respectful but constant. Photographers captured every arrival and departure from the hospital. Newspapers ran daily updates on her progress, often based on speculation rather than fact. The public hunger for information was understandable but exhausting for everyone involved. Dr. Morrison became a familiar figure in their lives, providing not just medical expertise but genuine compassion. He had treated celebrities and ordinary patients with equal skill, but there was something about Catherine's grace under pressure that impressed even him. She asked thoughtful questions about her treatment, showed concern for other patients, and never complained about the considerable discomfort she was experiencing. After the third treatment, Catherine's hair began to thin. She discovered strands on her pillow each morning, a visible reminder of the battle being fought inside her body. Rather than wait for the inevitable, she made an appointment with her longtime hairdresser to cut it short before it fell out completely. The haircut became a media event despite their efforts at privacy. Photographs of Catherine leaving the salon with her dramatically shorter style made front pages around the world. Fashion magazines analyzed the cut, missing the deeper significance entirely. William thought she looked beautiful, but he could see the sadness in her eyes when she looked in the mirror. "It's just hair," she said that evening, running her fingers through the shorter strands. "It will grow back." But they both knew it represented something larger, the physical cost of healing, the visible proof that their lives had fundamentally changed. That night, William held her closer than usual, both of them keenly aware of how precious each ordinary moment had become. The fourth treatment brought the worst side effects yet. Catherine spent 2 days in bed, too weak to do much more than sleep and sip clear broth. The children tiptoed around the house whispering to avoid disturbing her. William worked from his study when necessary, but his attention remained divided between state papers and monitoring his wife's condition. On the third day, she rallied enough to come downstairs for tea. The simple act of sitting in her favorite chair in the morning room felt like a major victory. William served her tea in her grandmother's china, the familiar ritual a comfort to both of them. "Halfway," she said quietly, referring to the treatment plan. "We're halfway through." William nodded, but they both knew the hardest part was still ahead. The surgery was scheduled for after the chemotherapy was complete, another mountain to climb when this one was finished. But for now, in the peaceful morning light, with tea cooling in delicate cups and the sound of their children playing in the garden, they had this moment of quiet hope. The surgery was scheduled for a gray December morning, 6 weeks after Catherine's final chemotherapy treatment. The tumor had shrunk significantly, Dr. Morrison reported with cautious optimism, making the operation more straightforward than originally feared. Still, the risks remained serious. The possibility of complications that could affect her speech, her memory, her fundamental sense of self. Catherine woke before dawn on the day of surgery, her mind surprisingly clear and calm. William lay beside her, pretending to sleep, but she could tell from his breathing that he was awake too. They had said everything that needed saying in the weeks leading up to this day, but the silence between them now felt heavy with unspoken fears. "Whatever happens in there," she whispered into the darkness, "I need you to promise me you'll take care of yourself too. The children need both their parents." William's arms tightened around her. "Nothing is going to happen," he said fiercely. "You're going to come through this surgery and recover completely, and we're going to grow old together watching our grandchildren play in the same gardens where our children played." The preoperative preparation was a blur of hospital gowns and consent forms and final consultations. Catherine's parents arrived early. Her mother's eyes red from crying. She thought no one had noticed. Harry flew in from California again, this time bringing Megan and the children. The family unified by crisis in a way that years of attempted reconciliation had failed to achieve. The children were staying with Catherine's parents during the surgery, a decision that had been debated extensively. George had wanted to come to the hospital, feeling protective of his mother in a way that broke William's heart. Charlotte had made a bracelet for Catherine to wear during the operation, carefully choosing beads in her favorite colors. Louis had drawn pictures of the whole family together, his artwork serving as a talisman of hope. In the pre-surgery waiting room, Catherine found herself thinking about all the patients who faced similar procedures without the luxury of private suites and world-class medical teams. The democracy of illness, she had come to understand, meant that despite all her privilege, she was ultimately no different from any other person fighting for their life. The thought was both humbling and strengthening. Dr. Morrison appeared at precisely 8 o'clock, dressed in surgical scrubs, his usual warm smile replaced by focused professional intensity. The surgical team was ready, he explained. The procedure would take approximately 6 hours, and they would keep the family updated throughout. Catherine hugged each family member goodbye, saving William for last. Their embrace in that sterile hospital corridor was witnessed by no cameras, recorded by no journalists, but it spoke volumes about the depth of their connection. 10 years of marriage, 3 children, countless public appearances and private moments had led to this. A goodbye that neither wanted to acknowledge might be final. I love you," Catherine whispered against his ear. "Thank you for the most wonderful life." "I'll be right here when you wake up," William promised, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Right here, just like always." The surgical waiting area became a makeshift royal residence for the day. Security personnel positioned themselves discreetly throughout the hospital, while family members settled in for the long hours ahead. Harry and William sat together, their conversation quiet and sporadic, years of complicated history temporarily set aside by shared fear for Catherine. Updates came every 2 hours like clockwork. The surgery was proceeding as expected. The tumor was being accessed successfully. The patient was stable and responding well to anesthesia. Each report brought relief mixed with the knowledge that they still had hours to go before knowing the final outcome. William found himself unable to sit still, pacing the corridors and checking his phone obsessively, despite having no important messages. The normal rhythms of royal life had been completely suspended. Meetings canceled, engagements postponed, official duties handed off to other family members. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, being a prince felt completely irrelevant compared to being a husband. The media camped outside the hospital maintained a respectful distance, but their presence was a constant reminder that this private family crisis was also a matter of public interest. News anchors provided hourly updates to audiences around the world. Social media filled with prayers and well wishes from strangers who felt connected to Catherine's story. Dr. Morrison appeared in the waiting room at 4:30, still in his surgical scrubs, his expression unreadable. The family gathered around him immediately, bracing themselves for whatever news he carried. William felt his heart stop as the surgeon removed his surgical cap and looked directly at him. "The surgery was completely successful," Dr. Morrison said, his professional demeanor cracking into a genuine smile. "We were able to remove the entire tumor with clear margins. The pathology will take a few days, but everything looked exactly as we hoped it would." The relief in the waiting room was palpable. William actually staggered, catching himself against the wall as the tension he had been carrying for months finally released. Harry grabbed his brother in a fierce hug while their father openly wept. The months of fear and uncertainty seemed to compress into a single moment of overwhelming gratitude. "She's asking for you," Dr. Morrison told William. "She's groggy from the anesthesia, but completely coherent. Her speech is clear, her motor functions are normal, and she specifically wants to know if you remembered to feed the dogs." William laughed through his tears, recognizing his wife's practical nature even in her post-surgical confusion. He followed the doctor through the corridors toward the recovery room, his legs unsteady with relief and anticipation. Catherine looked small in the hospital bed, her head wrapped in bandages, but her eyes were clear and focused when they found his. "There you are," she said softly, her voice slightly hoarse but unmistakably hers. "I told you I'd be fine." William took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines and monitoring equipment surrounding her. "How do you feel?" he asked, studying her face for any sign of the changes they had feared. "Like I've been hit by a truck," she admitted with a weak smile, "but like myself, still completely myself." She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "The children? Safe with your parents, drawing you get-well cards and arguing about who gets to visit first." William pulled his chair closer to her bed. "You did it, Catherine. You fought, and you won." As evening settled over the hospital, Catherine drifted in and out of sleep while William maintained his vigil beside her bed. The hardest part was over, but recovery would take time, patience, and continued courage from both of them. For now, though, it was enough to sit together in the quiet room, watching the monitors that confirmed what they both already knew. She was going to be all right. Recovery was slower and more frustrating than Catherine had expected. The surgery had been successful, but her body needed time to heal from the trauma of having her skull opened and her brain tissue manipulated. Simple tasks like reading for more than a few minutes or walking upstairs left her exhausted. The woman who had managed royal schedules and public appearances with effortless grace now struggled to get through a children's bedtime story without needing to rest. William became her constant companion during those first weeks, learning to anticipate her needs before she expressed them. He helped her with medications, supported her during physical therapy sessions, and provided gentle encouragement when frustration made her want to give up. The role reversal was difficult for both of them. Catherine had always been the strong one, the stable center around which their family revolved. The children adapted to their mother's new limitations with remarkable resilience. George read to her when her head hurt too much to focus on books herself. Charlotte became fiercely protective, shooing away visitors when she sensed her mother was tired. Louis, in his innocent wisdom, seemed to understand that extra cuddles were needed and distributed them generously. 3 weeks after surgery, Catherine insisted on attending Charlotte's school Christmas play, despite Dr. Morrison's gentle suggestion that she might want to wait a bit longer. William drove her himself, taking back roads to avoid photographers, and they slipped into the school auditorium through a side entrance just as the lights dimmed, watching their daughter sing about shepherds and angels while surrounded by other parents doing the same ordinary thing felt like a miracle. Catherine found herself crying during Silent Night, not from sadness but from profound gratitude for being alive to witness this simple, perfect moment. William's hand found hers in the darkness, both of them understanding that they would never take such occasions for granted again. The pathology results came back just after New Year, bringing the news they had prayed for. The tumor had been completely removed with clear margins, and there was no evidence of remaining cancer cells. Dr. Morrison's smile as he delivered this verdict was radiant, his professional satisfaction mingling with genuine affection for his patient. "We'll continue monitoring with regular scans," he explained, "but I'm very optimistic about your long-term prognosis. The brain is remarkably good at healing itself, and your recovery has been exceptional." Catherine's first public appearance since the surgery came in February, at a small charity event she had supported for years. The palace had offered to send someone else, but she felt ready to ease back into her royal duties. The event was carefully chosen, low-key, friendly, with people who knew and cared about her personally. The photographs from that day showed a Catherine who looked different but unmistakably herself. Her hair had grown back in soft curls, shorter than before but framing her face beautifully. She moved more slowly, paused more often, but her smile was genuine and her engagement with the charity workers was as warm as ever. The press was respectful, focusing on her obvious health and happiness rather than dwelling on her illness. William watched from the sidelines, proud but protective, ready to step in if she needed support. The months of crisis had changed him too, made him more focused on what truly mattered. State duties and royal protocol seemed less important now than protecting the woman who had fought so hard to stay with him. Spring brought renewed energy to Catherine's recovery. She began taking longer walks in the gardens at Anmer Hall, relearning the simple pleasure of physical movement without exhaustion. The children grew less careful around her, their natural exuberance gradually returning as they saw their mother getting stronger each day. The first official royal engagement came in April, a visit to the hospital where she had been treated. Catherine had specifically requested this appearance, wanting to thank the staff who had cared for her and meet with other patients beginning their own cancer journeys. The visit was deeply emotional for everyone involved. Walking through the chemotherapy ward where she had spent so many difficult hours, Catherine stopped to talk with current patients, offering encouragement and sharing her experience. A young mother receiving treatment for breast cancer began crying when Catherine sat beside her chair, explaining that seeing the Duchess's recovery had given her hope during her darkest moments. "You're going to get through this," Catherine said quietly, holding the woman's hand. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're stronger than you know. And there are people here who will help you every step of the way." Dr. Morrison accompanied her on the visit, watching with professional pride as his former patient transformed her personal struggle into support for others. The Catherine who had emerged from her illness was somehow both more fragile and stronger than before. Her compassion deepened by her own experience of vulnerability. The visit marked a turning point in Catherine's recovery and her return to public life. The woman who walked out of the hospital that day was different from the one who had entered it months before. Marked by illness but not diminished by it, scarred but not broken, changed but essentially herself. William waited for her at the car, studying her face as she approached. The strain of the hospital visit showed in her posture, but there was also a light in her eyes that hadn't been there since before her diagnosis. She was finding her way back to herself, to her role, to their life together. "How do you feel?" he asked as they drove away from the hospital, the question that had become their daily ritual. "Like I remember who I am," Catherine replied, watching the familiar London streets pass by the window, like I'm ready to start living again instead of just surviving. That evening, back at Kensington Palace, they sat together in the drawing room while the children played nearby. The future stretched ahead of them again, no longer truncated by fear but full of possibilities they had almost lost. The scars of their ordeal remained, but so did their love, their family, and their gratitude for the ordinary miracle of being together. The anniversary of Catherine's diagnosis arrived on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the phone call that had changed everything. She woke early and found William already dressed, standing at their bedroom window watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Without speaking, she joined him there, and they stood together in comfortable silence, both remembering that terrible morning and marveling at how far they had traveled since then. "A year," Catherine said softly, the words carrying the weight of all they had endured and overcome. "The longest and shortest year of my life," William replied, turning to study her face in the morning light. Her hair had grown back completely, curling softly around her shoulders. The pallor of illness had been replaced by healthy color, and the fear that had shadowed her eyes for months was finally gone. The day was deliberately kept private. No official engagements, no public appearances, just family time at Anmer Hall. They had learned to treasure these ordinary days, to find deep satisfaction in simple pleasures that once felt routine. Catherine spent the morning in the garden with the children, teaching Louis how to identify different birds while George and Charlotte helped harvest the last of the autumn vegetables. Watching his family from the kitchen window, William reflected on how the crisis had changed all of them. The children were more aware of life's fragility, but somehow more secure in their parents' love. He had learned to prioritize differently, to say no to commitments that kept him away from what mattered most. Catherine had emerged from her illness with a deeper sense of purpose, more determined than ever to use her platform for meaningful work. The afternoon brought visitors, Catherine's parents, Harry and his family, close friends who had supported them through the darkest months. The gathering was informal, almost like a celebration, though no one spoke directly about what they were commemorating. Instead, they shared stories, played with the children, and simply enjoyed being together. Dr. Morrison called that evening with the results of Catherine's latest scan, completely clear, as they had all hoped, but none had taken for granted. The relief in his voice matched their own as he confirmed what they already knew. She was not just surviving, but thriving, her recovery complete by every measure medicine could provide. "Thank you," Catherine said into the phone, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For giving me back my life." "You fought for it yourself," Dr. Morrison replied. "I just provided the tools." The courage was all yours. That night, after the children were in bed and their guests had departed, William and Catherine sat together on the sofa in their sitting room, sharing a bottle of wine and reflecting on their journey. The fire crackled in the grate, and outside an owl called from the trees surrounding their cottage. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" William asked. "About whatever happened, we would face it together." Catherine nodded, remembering the scared but determined woman she had been that day. "I meant it then. I mean it even more now." "I keep thinking about all the people who supported us," William said. "The doctors and nurses, our families, complete strangers who sent flowers and cards and prayers. I never fully understood before how much we need each other. All of us." The months of treatment had shown them a side of humanity they had never fully appreciated. The extraordinary kindness of ordinary people, the way communities rally around those who are suffering, the deep human capacity for hope in the face of despair. Letters had poured in from around the world, not just from well-wishers, but from people sharing their own stories of illness and recovery, finding strength in Catherine's journey. "I want to do more," Catherine said quietly. "Not just return to our old life, but use what we learned. There are so many people facing what we faced, but without the resources we had, without the support system we were blessed with." They talked late into the night about their plans for the future, the cancer research foundation they wanted to establish, the support programs for families dealing with serious illness, the ways they could use their experience to help others. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their family had instead given them a deeper sense of purpose. As they prepared for bed, Catherine paused at her dressing table, looking at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was undeniably changed by her experience, not just physically. though the subtle scar hidden by her hairline would always be there, but in ways that went much deeper. She had faced her own mortality and emerged not fearful but grateful, not diminished but somehow enlarged by the experience. "I'm not the same person I was a year ago," she said to William, who was watching her from across the room. "None of us are," he replied. "We're better, stronger, more aware of what matters." The world had indeed watched in silence as their private drama unfolded, respecting their need for privacy while offering unprecedented support. The final embrace they shared that night was witnessed by no one but themselves, but it spoke of triumph over fear, love tested and proven unbreakable, a family that had faced the ultimate test and emerged intact. Outside their bedroom window, the English countryside slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. Inside, William and Catherine held each other close, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring because they had learned that whatever came, they had the strength to face it together. The silence that surrounded them now was not the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the deep, peaceful quiet of love that has been tested in fire and found to be pure gold. Their story, which began with a devastating diagnosis and a nation holding its breath, ended not with tragedy but with triumph. Not the triumph of avoiding death, but the deeper victory of choosing to live fully, love completely, and find meaning in the midst of suffering. The world had watched, and what they witnessed was the power of the human spirit to transform even the darkest experiences into light.